We've just learned that Northwestern president Michael Schill is going to be stepping down. Again, he's going to stay in that position until the university is able to find a replacement. Schill did say he looks forward to returning to the classroom, also continuing to champion higher education, a cornerstone of American society that, despite its imperfections, is more important than ever to our nation's future. That is what he said in a very short statement there. Now we are going to be joined by Professor Stephen Caliendo from North Central College for a little bit more perspective on President Michael Schill resigning from Northwestern University. Thanks so much for your time, Professor.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm doing well. Want to start with, what do you think about the timing of this announcement?
And Tia did such a great job of going through sort of the recent history of what's been happening with President Schill and what's been happening in the broader context. It's a difficult time to be leading in higher ed, certainly as a university or college president, and certainly one at an elite school like Northwestern University. The timing strikes me as related to the federal court appeal decision that gave Harvard back its funding last night. I think that schools like Columbia and Brown and Northwestern, who either struck a deal or decided not to fight back in the way that Harvard fought back, had some backlash from the faculty for sure, and some of the students. Mostly had the support of the Board of Trustees, but and I think President Schill did on that issue as well. But at the end of the day, it clearly looks to me like it was the wrong decision. Not second guessing his decision at the moment, or the board's decision at the moment to decide whether or not to push back to sue the Trump administration. But given what we've learned yesterday about how Harvard has fared after they pushed back, I can't imagine that the timing of today's resignation doesn't have something to do with that.
Professor Caliendo, what is the status of the federal funding at Northwestern from the Trump administration?
Almost $800 million has been canceled in research funding from the Trump administration. And that's, you can't just absorb that. It doesn't matter what your endowment is. It doesn't matter what your business model is. No institution can simply absorb $800 million. And as Tia pointed out, there's other expenses that are happening there, and there are expenses that are not centered on academics. There certainly was the settlement that she mentioned, of course, the construction of the new football stadium. Again, not to criticize that. There's probably good reason to do those things. But the optics when they're spending there, and then there's academic funding that's been cut by an administration that's been openly hostile toward higher education generally, and then the reluctance to sort of fight back to hold on to that funding. And then I think it feels to me like the final straw that Harvard, who did decide to fight back, got their money reinstated, or a portion of their money reinstated yesterday. That to me seems like where the problems are sitting.
So you mentioned Harvard fighting back, and obviously President Schill decided not to do that for Northwestern, which leads me to, what qualities or, I guess, priorities do you think Northwestern is going to be looking for in their next president, given we're in different times in the state of higher education?
It's an unenviable position for the Board of Trustees to be in, honestly, to find a great leader to come in under these circumstances. And I don't say that about Northwestern in particular, and I have no inside information about the school up the street from us that we respect so much. But I will tell you that looking for a president today in the context of what's happening in higher education is going to be trickier than usual. It's always difficult to pick a college president. It's such an important position. And even though the pay is very high for the most elite schools, it's not that high at most colleges, even though it's higher than a faculty salary. But you're talking about people who have a lot on the line. And so to draw them in, somebody who has a real passion for leading in higher education, for fundraising. But now you add on top of that, having to make decisions, very courageous decisions or difficult decisions, how to interact with a federal government and a federal government landscape that is so challenging. It's probably easier in a state like Illinois, which is more or less supportive of higher education, than it would be in some other states. But that federal context cannot be ignored, and I would imagine that they're going to look for a leader who is well versed in navigating those types of waters. But these are really unprecedented times, and they're going to need a unique leader to pull them through.
And President Schill was on the job there for about 3 years, leading the institution. When we look back over time, what do we think his legacy is going to be? Is it going to be tied to some of these controversies that we've seen in the last 12 to 24 months or so?
It's hard to tell. College presidents' legacies are often defined generations later. It's a short tenure. Even in modern times, college presidents typically don't last more than 5 or 6 years. But 3 years is even by today's standards a pretty short tenure. Lots of accomplishments from Northwestern University that they can brag about in terms of what their students have accomplished, what their tremendous faculty have accomplished, both in terms of teaching and research in that time. But looking back on a 3-year tenure and the way that he had to resign under the circumstances under which he had to resign, it's hard to imagine in the near term that he will be fondly remembered. But I think in the longer term, it's easier with hindsight to see a lot more of the positives after some of the immediate difficulty dissipates.
In a situation where a president of a university resigns, is this kind of a situation where the board of trustees already maybe has an inkling of who they would want to fill that position before they make a move, or is this maybe something where they just completely start fresh?
In the way that I read the press release is that they're going to name an interim president, which means that had an understanding, whether it was number of hours or number of days, that President Schill was going to resign. I'm certain that they have somebody in mind for the interim role. It's not unique that they didn't announce that immediately. They want to give some time for this news to settle, and then have a different news cycle. And the news cycles are not the way they were when we were kids, right? The news cycles are a lot quicker, but have a more positive outlook about who the interim president will be. My guess is then they will enlist the services of a firm to do a full nationwide search for the next president of Northwestern University. But the interim leader will be picked by the Board of Trustees quite quickly. President Schill has indicated he's going to stay on until that interim leader is named. It could be weeks, but my guess is it will be days.
All right, Professor Caliendo from North Central College, thanks so much for your time and perspective this Thursday afternoon, as we have just learned that President Michael Schill at the University of Northwestern University has decided that he will resign. Thanks again so much for your time.